Rash Behari Bose, A Revolutionary Life in Exile. Part 1. Origins in Bengal, the Birth of a Patriot. Rash Behari Bose was born on March 15, 1886, in the Bengal region of what was then British India, a land under the firm control of the British Empire. At the time, India was officially known as the British Indian Empire, and the colonial regime held dominion over the subcontinent with military, economic, and cultural dominance. Rash Behari was born into a middle-class Bengali family with intellectual inclinations. His father, Binod Behari Bose, served as a clerk in the colonial government's newspaper department, while his mother, Bhubaneswari Devi, oversaw the household and played a critical role in his upbringing. Because his father often had to relocate due to work postings, Rash Behari was primarily raised by his grandfather and his mother. From a young age, he was exposed to the social realities of colonial life, witnessing both the opportunities and the limitations faced by educated Indians under foreign rule. His early childhood was spent in Chandernagore, also spelled Chandan Nagar, a small but culturally vibrant French colony near Calcutta, now Kolkata, and later in the bustling, intellectual capital of Bengal itself, Calcutta. Rash Behari Bose was an inquisitive and intelligent student, excelling in his studies and showing early signs of a deeply nationalistic spirit. His education at local schools in Chandernagore and Kolkata was grounded in both Western and Indian curricula, offering him a unique, hybrid worldview. He grew up amid growing nationalist sentiment, which was steadily gaining traction among the educated Indian middle and upper classes. Like many boys of his age and time, Rash Behari was drawn to the idea of military service. He aspired to become a soldier in the British Indian Army, viewing it as a path to honor, service, and perhaps a more influential platform to contribute to his nation. However, due to health-related issues, some accounts say poor eyesight or frail health, he was denied admission into military service. This rejection, while initially disappointing, proved to be a turning point in his life. It redirected his ambitions from military service to revolutionary activism. To appease his father and conform to societal expectations, Bose eventually joined the colonial administration as a clerk. He was assigned to the Forest Research Institute in Dehradun, located in the Himalayan foothills in northern India. There, he worked as a head clerk, a relatively influential position in the bureaucratic machinery of the colonial government. However, what appeared to be a mundane administrative role became a strategic platform for his covert revolutionary activities. The Forest Research Institute, ironically, became a staging ground for Bose's radical ideas. The position allowed him to interact with Gurkha soldiers and introduce them to revolutionary philosophies. He also used his access to chemical supplies ostensibly for forestry experiments to acquire materials for making bombs. These activities were not isolated acts of rebellion but part of a broader ideological and strategic movement. Rash Behari Bose's revolutionary outlook was deeply inspired by Indian spiritual and nationalist thinkers, particularly Aurobindo Ghosh, a prominent political activist who later turned towards spiritual philosophy. Bose absorbed Aurobindo's ideas about spiritual nationalism, which wove together India's ancient heritage with the urgent call for political independence. The combination of nationalist ideology and religious motivation deeply influenced Bose's worldview. His revolutionary fervor found an outlet in 1912 when he participated in an audacious attempt to assassinate Lord Charles Hardinge, the then Viceroy of India. The plot, meticulously planned and executed, involved the hurling of a bomb at the Viceroy's procession in Delhi. Although Lord Hardinge was injured but survived, the attack sent shockwaves through the British administration. The event marked Bose as a dangerous revolutionary and led to a widespread manhunt by British authorities. A bounty of 12 0 rupees was placed on his head, a significant sum at the time. Still determined to continue the struggle, Bose became one of the key conspirators in the failed Lahore conspiracy case, an attempt to incite armed rebellion among Indian soldiers during World War I. With the British hot on his trail and the prospect of imprisonment or worse looming large, Rash Behari made a bold decision that would alter the course of his life and the Indian independence movement. In 1915, under the guise of being a relative of Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, Bose fled India for Japan. It was a calculated move. Japan was one of the few Asian nations that had managed to resist European colonization and was fast emerging as a regional power. Bose hoped that from Japanese soil, he could continue his revolutionary work and gain support for India's cause. In June of that year, Rash Behari Bose arrived in Japan, beginning a new chapter in his life that would span 3 decades and 2 continents. Initially, he hoped to quietly regroup and rebuild the Indian independence movement in exile. But little did he know that his arrival would eventually cement his place not only in the history of Indian nationalism, but also in the cultural and culinary history of Japan. In Japan, Bose would find friends and allies, evade British extradition attempts, fall in love, start a family, and spearhead efforts that would later culminate in the formation of the Indian National Army. But before any of that could unfold, he had to survive his early days in a foreign land, navigating cultural differences, political surveillance, and personal challenges. This was the genesis of a life lived in service to a nation not yet born. Part 2: Flight to Japan, a revolutionary reborn in exile. When Rash Behari Bose arrived in Japan in June 1915, the country stood at a unique crossroads of tradition and modernization. The Meiji Restoration had transformed Japan into a rising imperial power, and its victory in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905, had earned it newfound respect on the world stage, particularly among Asians struggling under colonial rule. For Bose, Japan represented a beacon of hope, an Asian country that had successfully resisted Western colonization and could potentially support the dream of a free India. However, Bose's arrival was fraught with danger. Though he managed to enter the country by posing as a relative of Rabindranath Tagore, his real identity soon became known to both British authorities and, importantly, to their Japanese allies. At that time, Japan and Britain were bound by a formal alliance, the Anglo-Japanese Alliance of 1902. The alliance obligated both countries to support each other diplomatically and militarily. This put Bose in immediate jeopardy, as the British government began pressing Tokyo to arrest and extradite him. Before the pressure mounted, Bose began to establish important contacts within Japanese society. One of the first key figures he met was Bhagwan Singh, a fellow Indian revolutionary already living in exile in Japan. Through Singh's introductions, Bose met several influential Asian nationalists and Japanese sympathizers, including none other than the legendary Chinese revolutionary leader Sun Yat-sen. Sun was himself in temporary exile in Japan, having opposed the regime of Yuan Shikai in China. The two men, bound by shared dreams of Asian liberation, developed a cordial relationship that would prove useful in the coming months. Bose also became acquainted with Japanese Pan-Asianist intellectuals and activists who were sympathetic to the idea of Indian independence. Among them was Harambalal Gupta, another Indian nationalist in Japan, who introduced him to Kawashime, a controversial but influential Japanese thinker and activist known for his strong support of anti-colonial struggles in Asia. Through these growing networks, Bose began to coordinate clandestine efforts to smuggle arms from Japan to India, hoping to support insurrectionary efforts back home. But Bose's covert activities were soon discovered. In late 1915, the British government lodged formal complaints with the Japanese authorities, accusing Bose of illegally entering the country and engaging in subversive activities. Bowing to the diplomatic pressure, the Japanese government issued a deportation order for Bose on November 28, 1915. His future looked bleak. Deportation to British India would almost certainly result in his arrest, torture, or even execution. Yet fate intervened in the form of a powerful and unlikely ally. Toyama Mitsuru, a Japanese ultranationalist and influential figure in Pan-Asianist circles. Toyama was deeply committed to the idea of liberating Asia from Western imperialism and saw Bose's struggle as part of a broader effort for Asian solidarity. Upon learning of Bose's situation, Toyama introduced him to another vital supporter, Inukai Tsuyoshi, a prominent Japanese politician who would later become prime minister. Toyama, Inukai, and other sympathizers swiftly mobilized to protect Bose. They arranged for him to go into hiding, aided by another sympathetic couple, Izo Soma and his wife, Koko, proprietors of the famous Nakamuraya bakery in Tokyo's Shinjuku district. The Somas were already well known in artistic and intellectual circles for their support of Pan-Asian causes. With their help, Bose was secretly housed in the attic studio above the bakery. For the next 4 months, Bose lived in this secret hideout, carefully avoiding detection. He was watched over by the Soma family and gradually became more than just a fugitive in their home. He became part of their lives. During this time, Bose formed a strong bond with the Somas' eldest daughter, Toshiko, who assisted him in communication and errand. Their shared experiences and ideals blossomed into affection, and their relationship would eventually lead to marriage. Meanwhile, a grassroots campaign was growing in Japan to oppose Bose's deportation. Influential figures like Toyama and Inukai, along with Pan-Asianist groups, pressured the Japanese government to rescind the order. Their argument was framed not just in terms of Bose's innocence, but as part of a broader ideological alignment. Japan should support those struggling against Western imperialism, not hand them over. By the end of 1915, the Japanese government, facing growing domestic resistance and perhaps calculating the value of keeping Bose as an informal ally in Asia, reversed its decision. The deportation order was withdrawn. Bose, however, remained a marked man, and British surveillance and pressure did not ease. Over the next several years, from 1915 to 1918, he lived a life of constant movement and disguise, relocating from one part of Japan to another 17 different locations in total to evade detection by British agents. Despite the hardships, Bose's time in hiding also allowed him to develop deeper cultural and political ties with Japanese society. He refined his understanding of Japanese language and customs, and slowly integrated himself into the intellectual life of his host country. He continued to advocate for Indian independence, now from a position of relative safety, surrounded by a growing number of Japanese supporters. In 1918, a turning point came in his personal life. Toyama Mitsuru, who had previously helped save him, also arranged to act as a formal go-between for his marriage to Toshiko Soma. Their union symbolized more than just personal love. It was a fusion of two worlds, Indian revolutionary idealism and Japanese cultural solidarity. That same year, Bose officially became a naturalized citizen of Japan, a move that secured his legal safety and gave him the freedom to focus entirely on the Indian independence cause. With Toshiko by his side and the Japanese government no longer pursuing him, Rash Behari Bose finally began to enjoy a semblance of stability. In 1923, he and his wife settled on the grounds of the Nakamuraya property in Tokyo, constructing a home where they could raise their family and continue their political work. Together, they had a son and a daughter. Tragically, Their happiness was cut short when Toshiko died in 1925 at the age of just 26, succumbing to pneumonia. Her death was a profound personal loss for Bose, but he channeled his grief into a renewed commitment to India's freedom. By the mid-1920s, Bose had already become a respected figure in Japanese political and social circles. He was seen not only as a determined revolutionary but also as a symbol of the growing Pan-Asian solidarity that was beginning to take root across the continent. As the world edged closer to another great conflict, Bose's role would become even more significant. His life in Japan was no longer just about survival, it was about leadership, legacy, and liberation. Part 3. Building Bridges. A revolutionary rooted in Japan. By the mid-1920s, Rash Behari Bose had transitioned from fugitive to citizen, from revolutionary on the run to an honored resident in the heart of Tokyo. His marriage to Toshiko Soma in 1918 had not only symbolized personal union, but served as a powerful bridge between Indian and Japanese cultures. In 1923, after years of evading British surveillance, he was officially naturalized as a Japanese citizen. This critical change allowed him to focus more freely on political, cultural, and ideological work, furthering the cause of Indian independence from abroad. Settling at the Nakamuraya residence in Tokyo with Toshiko and their growing family, Bose finally found a semblance of peace and belonging. The Nakamuraya Bakery, famous in its own right, became a cultural and political salon of sorts, a meeting place for artists, writers, and political thinkers sympathetic to anti-colonial causes. There, Rash Behari Bose became not just a revolutionary, but also a mentor, a diplomat in exile, and an informal ambassador of the Indian independence movement to Japan. Toshiko's untimely death in 1925, at the age of just 26, was a devastating blow. She had been his confidant, caretaker, and anchor during turbulent times. Her death, due to pneumonia, left Bose to raise their son and daughter alone. Despite his grief, he continued to immerse himself in the independence struggle. Instead of withdrawing, he poured his energy into building networks both in Japan and across Southeast Asia that could support India's liberation. One of the most unique contributions Bose made to Japan, unexpected even for a freedom fighter, was cultural. Deeply proud of his heritage, he was dismayed by the westernized version of curry that had become popular in Japan. Known locally as kare raisu, this dish had been imported via British naval and army recipes and bore little resemblance to the spiced complexity of Indian cuisine. To Bose, this dish was an insult to the culinary traditions of his homeland. When Nakamuraya opened its tea room in 1927, Bose saw an opportunity to introduce authentic Indian curry to Japanese palates. He worked closely with the Soma family to design a menu centered around what he called Jun Indo Shiki Kari Raisu, genuine Indian-style curry rice. Every detail mattered to him. The spices, the rice, insisting on Japanese hakumai rice similar to the white rice used in India, and even the meat, he preferred flavorful native breeds like shamo chickens. The resulting dish became a massive success, elevating Nakamuraya's reputation and introducing Indian culinary traditions to a Japanese public that had never experienced anything like it. But Rash Behari Bose's mission was never merely gastronomic. Throughout the 1930s, he worked behind the scenes to expand his influence and forge stronger ties with other Indian nationalists and expatriates. One of his closest associates during this time was A.M. Nair, a fellow Indian expatriate and independence activist who would become a key figure in Bose's later efforts. Together, they built a quiet but robust network of Indian nationals and Japanese sympathizers dedicated to the cause. During this same period, Japan's domestic and foreign policies were also undergoing dramatic shifts. The country was becoming more militarized and expansionist, and anti-Western sentiment was gaining momentum. For Rash Behari Bose, this transformation, while troubling in some aspects, also presented an opportunity. He saw in Japan's rising opposition to British colonial power a potential ally for the Indian independence struggle. His writings and speeches increasingly focused on the idea of Pan-Asianism, the belief that Asian nations should unite to resist Western imperialism and support one another in the fight for sovereignty. With Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and its increasingly aggressive posture toward Western powers, Bose's ideas gained traction among certain factions within the Japanese government and military. Though Bose himself remained focused on the non-violent spread of political awareness and anti-colonial sentiment, he began receiving support from military officials who viewed the Indian nationalist movement as a strategic tool against British influence in Asia. His name became increasingly well known among Indian revolutionaries abroad, particularly in Southeast Asia, where expatriate communities were organizing around the cause. Though his distance from India prevented him from engaging directly with the Indian National Congress and other groups active within the subcontinent, he remained in contact with many leaders and activists. His status as a senior revolutionary who had dedicated decades to the cause gave him enormous credibility. Despite the rising tension in Asia and across the world, Bose never lost sight of the long-term goal, a free India. He carefully maintained the trust of his Japanese allies while preserving his integrity as an Indian nationalist. At a time when many revolutionaries had fallen into ideological infighting or been co-opted by foreign agendas, Bose remained focused, disciplined, and resolute. By the late 1930s, war loomed once again on the global horizon. The Japanese government, increasingly hostile to Britain and the United States, had begun to explore possibilities of supporting anti-British movements in Asia, not purely out of ideological solidarity, but also out of strategic interest. It was within this evolving political environment that Bose's quiet preparations over the previous 2 decades began to bear fruit. His network of exiled Indians, Japanese officials, Pan-Asian thinkers, and Southeast Asian contacts would soon form the basis of a much larger movement. And when the storm of the Second World War finally broke, Rash Behari Bose would step out of the background and into a leading role once again, this time as the architect of one of the most ambitious military and political projects of India's struggle for independence. Yet it is also during this phase that Bose's physical health began to decline. Years of stress, fugitive life, and relentless political work had taken a toll on his body. Still, he pressed forward with unwavering determination, knowing that the twilight of colonialism was fast approaching. For Rash Behari Bose, Japan was no longer just a place of refuge, it had become his second homeland. And from this new home, he was about to influence the course of Indian history in ways no one could have predicted when he first set foot on Japanese soil in 1915. Part 4. War and Opportunity. The Rise of the Indian National Army. By the early 1940s, the geopolitical landscape of Asia was changing with unprecedented speed. The outbreak of World War II in Europe, followed by the rapid expansion of Japan's imperial ambitions in Asia, created both dangers and opportunities for anti-colonial movements across the continent. For Rash Behari Bose, now in his mid-50s and a respected figure within Japanese political circles, this was the moment he had long prepared for, a time when global conflict might finally offer a serious opening for India's liberation. The entry of Japan into World War II in December 1941, marked by the attack on Pearl Harbor and swift Japanese advances across Southeast Asia, radically shifted the balance of power. The British colonial administration, long seen as invincible in Asia, was suddenly on the defensive. Within months, Japan had occupied vast territories, including Malaya, Singapore, and Burma, all home to sizable Indian populations, including former British Indian Army personnel who had been captured as prisoners of war, POWs. Rash Behari Bose immediately recognized the potential of these developments. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 was especially significant. Among the 85, 0 Allied troops taken prisoner were over 40, 0 soldiers of Indian origin. To Bose, these captured men were not merely prisoners, they were a potential army, waiting to be awakened with the call for independence. In March 1942, Bose made his most ambitious move yet. He traveled to Southeast Asia to lay the groundwork for a new phase of the Indian independence struggle. In a widely publicized event held in Tokyo, Bose convened a conference with representatives of the Indian diaspora and Indian POWs. There, he formally announced the creation of the Indian Independence League, IIL, an organization that would serve as a political umbrella group for the independence movement in East and Southeast Asia. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Many Indian soldiers, disillusioned by British defeat and encouraged by Bose's fiery call for liberation, pledged allegiance to the new cause. Out of this momentum emerged the Indian National Army, INA, a military force composed largely of Indian POWs and expatriates. It was the first organized military unit formed outside of India, with the explicit goal of fighting the British for Indian independence. Initially, the INA was led by Captain Mohan Singh, a former officer in the British Indian Army who had been captured by the Japanese during their Malayan campaign. Though enthusiastic, Singh struggled with leadership on multiple fronts. His authority within the army was limited by his relatively junior rank, and his decisions were often influenced by personal ambition. Additionally, his interactions with the Japanese military authorities were increasingly strained, particularly as he perceived Japanese control to be undermining the autonomy of the INA. By late 1942, the INA under Mohan Singh had begun to unravel. Infighting, distrust of Japanese intentions, and leadership issues led to a state of disarray. Rash Behari Bose, witnessing the potential collapse of the movement he had worked so hard to build, intervened. As president of the Indian Independence League, he moved decisively to restructure the INA and restore its credibility. To resolve the leadership crisis, Bose and his close associates began seeking a figure who could command both moral and military authority, someone who would inspire unity, gain Japanese respect, and ignite the imagination of Indians everywhere. That man, they concluded, was Subhas Chandra Bose, no relation to Rash Behari, a charismatic leader and former president of the Indian National Congress who had long advocated for more militant resistance to British rule. Subhas Chandra Bose had recently escaped British house arrest in India and made his way to Nazi Germany, where he sought support for the Indian cause. Learning of the INA's formation and Rash Behari Bose's efforts in the East, Subhas Chandra Bose expressed interest in relocating to Asia. In early 1943, with the assistance of the German and Japanese governments, he undertook a daring submarine journey from Europe to Southeast Asia. Rash Behari Bose greeted him upon his arrival in Singapore with profound respect. At the Indian Independence League conference on July 4, 1943, in a symbolic and deeply emotional gesture, Rash Behari formally handed over leadership of the League and command of the INA to Subhas Chandra Bose. Rash Behari assumed the role of honorary president, stepping back to allow the younger, more energetic leader to take the helm. This handover was not just organizational, it was generational. Rash Behari had spent nearly 3 decades in exile, working tirelessly to build bridges and nurture political infrastructure. Subhas, with his dynamic personality and military ambition, would now lead the movement into its most active and militarized phase. The INA, under Subhas Chandra Bose, would go on to engage in combat operations alongside Japanese forces in Burma and India during the ill-fated Imphal campaign of 1944. Despite ceding leadership, Rash Behari Bose continued to play a critical advisory role. His deep knowledge of Japanese politics, his long-standing relationships with influential figures, and his ability to mediate between Indian revolutionaries and Japanese authorities remained invaluable. He stayed in close contact with both the Japanese military leadership and the members of the IIL, ensuring that the movement retained its ideological clarity and moral purpose. However, this intense phase of activity also took a toll on his already fragile health. Now, in his late 50s, Bose began to suffer from serious illnesses. His condition steadily declined through late 1943 and into 1944, even as the INA surged forward in its campaign against the British in Burma. He remained deeply invested in the movement's success, following every report from the front and offering advice when able. His role in helping create and stabilize the INA, an organization that would become legendary in Indian nationalist history, cannot be overstated. Though Subhas Chandra Bose would later become its most visible face, it was Rash Behari Bose who laid its foundations, built its networks, and gave it its initial credibility in Japan and Southeast Asia. As the war dragged on and the tide began to turn against Japan, Bose's health continued to worsen. Yet he remained in Singapore, still determined to witness the fruits of his life's work. Though independence would not come during his lifetime, Rash Behari Bose had already secured his place as one of the most significant architects of India's global struggle for freedom. Part 5. The Free India Provisional Government, a Dream in Wartime. As the Indian National Army, INA, surged forward under the leadership of Subhas Chandra Bose, Rash Behari Bose observed with a mixture of hope and solemn pride. He had relinquished the reins of leadership in 1943, not out of fatigue alone, but from a profound understanding that the movement for Indian independence had entered a new phase 1, requiring youthful vigor, military strategy, and bold diplomacy. Yet, even from behind the scenes, his guiding hand and vision remained essential. In October 1943, a major milestone was reached: the establishment of the Free India Provisional Government, also known as the Azad Hind Government, in Singapore. This event was the culmination of decades of political labor and sacrifice by Indian revolutionaries in exile. Though Subhas Chandra Bose was appointed as its head of state, Prime Minister and Minister of War and Foreign Affairs, Rash Behari Bose was present as a senior leader, advisor, and a respected elder who had made it all possible. The Azad Hind government was formed with Japanese support, but was designed to represent the will and sovereignty of the Indian people. It declared war on the British Empire and its allies, and claimed authority over all of India, although, in reality, its territorial control was limited to regions temporarily under Japanese occupation, such as parts of Burma and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Nevertheless, the establishment of a government in exile gave the independence movement a concrete and symbolic form. For the first time, the dream of a sovereign Indian state had found a legal and diplomatic structure, even if only partially recognized by Axis-aligned nations. The ceremony that marked the birth of the Azad Hind government was grand and charged with emotion. Subhas Chandra Bose declared that India was finally free, even if that freedom had yet to reach Indian soil. Rash Behari, seated among the honored guests, was not merely a witness, he was a founding father. He had spent over 2 decades in exile, organizing, lobbying, mentoring, and envisioning this moment. The new government quickly took steps to gain diplomatic recognition. Countries such as Germany, Japan, Italy, and their allies, including the puppet governments of Manchukuo, the Philippines, and Thailand, acknowledged its legitimacy. Though these recognitions were geopolitically motivated, they allowed the Azad Hind government to operate embassies, issue passports, and raise funds. It even began printing its own currency, stamps, and administrative papers. A few weeks after its establishment, the Azad Hind government made a bold move. It formally declared war on the United Kingdom and the United States. While largely symbolic, this declaration was a statement of defiance. It also positioned the Indian independence movement as part of a broader anti-imperialist, anti-Western struggle, aligning it, controversially, with the Axis powers. This alignment was deeply controversial among other Indian political factions, especially those loyal to the Indian National Congress, which was pursuing a non-violent path to independence and had condemned cooperation with fascist powers. Rash Behari Bose, however, had long believed that India's colonizers would never relinquish control through moral persuasion alone. He had accepted that in the world of realpolitik, alliances, even uneasy ones, were sometimes necessary to break the back of colonial rule. Bose's views reflected the broader split in Indian revolutionary thought, between those who believed in Gandhi's methods of civil disobedience and nonviolence, and those who, like Subhas and Rash Behari, saw armed resistance as not only justified but essential. Meanwhile, the Indian National Army, restructured and re-energized under Subhas Chandra Bose's leadership, began military operations against British forces. Now, numbering tens of thousands of troops, it fought alongside the Japanese in the Burma campaign, including in the famous but ill-fated Imphal offensive of 1944. The INA, driven by a spirit of patriotism and desperation, penetrated into Indian territory, briefly hoisting the Indian tricolor flag in Manipur. For Rash Behari Bose, these developments were bittersweet. He had envisioned such a moment for decades. Indian soldiers fighting under their own banner for their own country. But he was also acutely aware of the enormous costs. The INA's campaigns were riddled with logistical challenges, lack of supplies, and growing disillusionment among the ranks. The Japanese military, once seen as liberators, increasingly imposed control, and tensions began to rise between Indian officers and their Japanese counterparts. Still, the INA's efforts resonated across India. Word of their bravery and determination filtered into the subcontinent, inspiring nationalist fervor and weakening the moral legitimacy of British rule. Even when the Imphal campaign ultimately failed, the symbolic impact of the INA's march into India could not be undone. During this period, Rash Behari Bose began to retreat from active operations due to deteriorating health. Years of stress, fugitive life, and unrelenting commitment to the cause had weakened his body. Yet he remained a key advisor, quietly guiding policy and offering counsel. He was deeply involved in discussions around the movement of the Azad Hind government's headquarters to Rangoon, Yangon, in Japanese-occupied Burma. The relocation was strategic, closer to the front lines, and more accessible to Indian communities in Southeast Asia. In Rangoon, the INA redoubled its recruitment efforts, drawing support from the large Indian population in Burma. Rash Behari Bose continued to act as a bridge between cultures, smoothing relations between the Japanese administration and the INA leadership. His long-standing credibility with both sides was instrumental in keeping the fragile alliance from splintering. Despite the grinding war and the internal tensions within the INA and the provisional government, Rash Behari remained unwavering in his belief that independence was within reach. He had come so far from secret bomb-making plots in Dehradun to years of hiding in Tokyo, to standing on the platform beside Subhas Chandra Bose at the birth of a government in exile. By late 1944, however, it was becoming clear that the tide of the war was turning. Allied forces were regaining ground in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Japanese supply lines were stretched thin, Morale was weakening. Still, Rash Behari Bose remained committed to the end. Even as his health worsened, he refused to abandon his post or his dream. For him, the struggle had never just been about military victory, it had been about the awakening of a people, the creation of national identity, and the assertion of dignity. Whether or not the Azad Hind government would survive, he had helped establish a precedent that Indians could lead themselves, govern themselves, and fight for themselves even if from exile. The final chapter of his life would unfold amidst this collapse. But Rash Behari Bose had already cemented his legacy. He had not only introduced Indian resistance to Japan, he had planted its roots in the soil, watched it grow, and handed it over to a new generation to bloom. Part 6. The Final Struggle, Decline, Legacy, and a Life's Reflection. By early 1945, Rash Behari Bose's health had severely deteriorated. Though he remained mentally alert and spiritually committed to India's freedom, his physical condition had begun to fail him rapidly. Decades of tireless revolutionary work, years of exile and fugitive life, and the emotional toll of war had left his body fragile and vulnerable. Despite this, he refused to abandon his role, continuing to advise, write, and offer guidance even from his sickbed. At this point, the tides of World War II were decisively turning against Japan and the Axis powers. The Allies had regained the upper hand in Southeast Asia. British and American forces were advancing, and Japanese strongholds were falling one after another. The Indian National Army, INA, which Rash Behari had helped create and nurture, was now facing immense difficulties. Supply chains were collapsing, morale among soldiers was weakening, and rations and ammunition were running dangerously low. Despite these obstacles, the INA soldiers fought on with remarkable determination. Even as the Imphal campaign failed in 1944, the Army's symbolic value grew. In India, news of Indian soldiers fighting against British forces under an independent Indian banner electrified the nationalist movement. The British realized that the idea of the INA had sown deep seeds of resistance among the Indian population. From his residence in Tokyo, Rash Behari Bose continued to correspond with leaders in the Indian Independence League and the Japanese military. Though increasingly bedridden, he insisted on being kept updated about military and political developments. He remained deeply concerned about the INA's dwindling resources and the safety of Subhas Chandra Bose, who had taken command of the Azad Hind government and was now frequently traveling between Singapore, Rangoon, and front-line positions. Though he and Subhas Chandra Bose shared a surname and a revolutionary spirit, their personalities had been quite different. Rash Behari was quiet, introspective, and methodical, a man who preferred strategic patience and cultural diplomacy. Subhas was charismatic, bold, and often confrontational. Yet, despite their differences, there was genuine respect between the two men. Rash Behari saw Subhas as the natural torchbearer of the movement he had spent his life building, and Subhas often referred to Rash Behari with reverence, acknowledging him as the father of Indian revolutionary activities in East Asia. In the final weeks of his life, Rash Behari Bose was cared for by close companions, including A.M. Nair, one of his most trusted associates in Japan. Nair, like many others, had been inspired by Bose's selflessness, his unwavering commitment to Indian independence, and his remarkable ability to build bridges across cultures and ideologies. The two men had worked together for years to organize Indian communities, secure Japanese support, and create the infrastructure of the independence movement abroad. On January 21, 1945, Rash Behari Bose passed away in Tokyo at the age of 58. He died far from his homeland, still under British rule at the time, yet surrounded by allies who considered him not just a revolutionary, but a visionary and a hero. His passing marked the end of an era. The quiet departure of a man who had devoted every fiber of his being to a cause that transcended borders. Before his death, the Japanese government had decided to honor him with the prestigious Order of the Rising Sun, second class, in recognition of his contributions to Asian solidarity and the cultural ties between Japan and India. Though the award was announced during his final days, it was formally conferred posthumously. This rare honor reflected the high esteem in which he was held, not just as a political ally, but as a cultural and ideological bridge builder. His remains were laid to rest in Tama Cemetery in Tokyo, an enduring testament to his life's journey from colonial Bengal to revolutionary Japan. The epitaph engraved upon his tomb speaks not only of the man, but of the ideals he lived and died for. Just a few months after his death, tragedy struck again. His only son, Masahide Bose, who had followed in his father's footsteps of loyalty and service, died during the Battle of Okinawa. As a second lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army, Masahide was killed in action in June 1945, another life lost to the crucible of war. Even in death, Rash Behari Bose's legacy refused to fade. His contributions continued to influence India's independence movement. When the war ended and the INA trials were held in India, massive public outcry and support for the INA veterans shocked the British authorities. It became increasingly clear that the idea of armed Indian resistance, once dismissed as fringe or extremist, now commanded wide respect and admiration. Leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, who had initially distanced themselves from Bose's militarized methods, began to publicly acknowledge the importance of the INA and the symbolism it represented. Though the INA had been militarily defeated, it had ignited something more powerful, a sense of national unity and urgency that would accelerate India's path to independence just 2 years later, in 1947. Beyond politics, Rash Behari Bose's legacy lived on in Japanese society. He was remembered not only as a revolutionary, but also as a cultural figure who had introduced authentic Indian curry to the Japanese public. Nakamuraya, the family business of his in-laws, continued to serve the signature curry dish that Bose had helped design in the 1920s. The dish, known as Jun Indo Shiki Curry, remains a popular menu item to this day, cherished not only for its flavor, but for the story behind it, a tale of resistance, love, and cross-cultural exchange. Even today, historians and scholars in both India and Japan study Rash Behari Bose's life for its unique blend of diplomacy, revolution, and cross-cultural legacy. He stands as a rare figure in modern history, a revolutionary who succeeded not through mass movements or political office, but through quiet persistence, intellectual conviction, and transnational solidarity. As India moved toward its long-awaited independence, many of the ideas and institutions that Rash Behari Bose had helped shape continued to influence its evolution, particularly the notion that Indian freedom could and should be part of a broader Asia-wide resistance to colonialism. In this way, Rash Behari Bose was not only a patriot of India, but a visionary of Asia. He died without seeing an independent India, but his contributions, both direct and indirect, were instrumental in its realization. A man ahead of his time, Rash Behari Bose left behind a legacy not of a single revolution, but of many: political, cultural, ideological, and human. Part 7. Culinary Legacy and Cultural Diplomacy Beyond the Battlefield. While Rash Behari Bose is best remembered for his lifelong dedication to India's independence, his legacy extends well beyond politics and revolutionary struggle. One of the most unexpected and enduring aspects of his life's work lies in the realm of culture specifically, in his pioneering role in introducing authentic Indian cuisine to Japan. It was not merely a matter of taste, but of identity, pride, and cross-cultural diplomacy. During the 1920s, Japanese society was rapidly modernizing, and with modernization came new culinary influences. Among these was curry rice, or kare resu, a dish adapted from the British Navy and Army, which had, in turn, modified Indian curry to suit Western palates. The result was a stew-like concoction that bore little resemblance to the rich, spiced complexity of Indian food. To Bose, this was not only a culinary disappointment but a distortion of cultural heritage. Living with the Soma family, who owned the well-known Nakamuraya Bakery and Cafe in Tokyo's Shinjuku district, Bose found an opportunity to change this. The Somas, deeply influenced by Asian spiritual and political thought, were sympathetic to Bose's ideals and shared his belief in cultural authenticity. When they decided to expand their cafe in 1927 to include a tea salon, Bose proposed something bold, introducing a genuine Indian curry dish that reflected the true flavors and soul of his homeland. This proposal was more than a culinary suggestion. It was a cultural intervention. Bose insisted that the ingredients, preparation methods, and presentation all reflect traditional Indian practices. He selected shamo, Japanese game fowl, to mimic the texture and flavor of Indian village poultry. He oversaw the blending of spices and advocated for using hakumai, a type of polished white rice, which closely resembled Indian long-grain rice. Everything from the cooking technique to the final plating was carefully orchestrated under his guidance. The result was Nakamuraya's Jun Indoshiki Kari Raisu, Jun Indoshik Meisur, a dish unlike anything then available in Japan. Rich with flavor, layered with aromatic spices, and served with a sense of elegance, it became an immediate sensation. Patrons lined up not just to taste something new, but to experience a piece of India. The curry was marketed as an exotic yet refined dish, linked not only to foreign lands but to the charismatic Indian revolutionary who had made Japan his home. Bose's success in the kitchen was, of course, only part of the story. His influence extended into how Indians were perceived in Japan. Before his time, most Japanese people had limited or stereotypical views of India, shaped by colonial narratives and superficial cultural exposure. Bose, with his eloquence, intellect, and dignified manner, humanized the Indian struggle. He became, in many ways, a cultural ambassador, educating the Japanese public not only about India's political plight but also its rich traditions, philosophies, and arts. Through lectures, essays, and personal interactions, Bose introduced Japanese intellectuals and students to Indian spiritual thought, particularly the teachings of Swami Vivekananda and Aurobindo Ghose. He spoke of India's ancient civilization, its contributions to philosophy, and its vision for self-rule rooted in moral and cultural revival. In turn, he learned much about Japanese society, Bushido ethics, and the aesthetics of restraint and discipline. The cultural bridge he built was not one-sided. His children with Toshiko Soma, one son and one daughter, were themselves living embodiments of this fusion of Indian and Japanese identities. Raised in Tokyo but deeply aware of their Indian heritage, they became part of a new generation that viewed both cultures not as opposites but as complements. Though his son Masahide's death in the Battle of Okinawa was a devastating loss, it also underscored the depth of Bose's integration into Japanese society. His family's sacrifices had been real, and Japan was not just a host country, it had become home. Another extension of his legacy can be seen in the life of A.M. Nair, a fellow Indian revolutionary who had worked under Bose's mentorship. After India gained independence in 1947, Nair went on to found the Nair restaurant in Tokyo in 1949, the first full-fledged Indian restaurant in Japan. The dishes served there were direct descendants of Bose's efforts at Nakamaraya. Nair's restaurant remains operational today, run by his descendants, serving authentic South Indian meals to patrons curious not only about Indian food but also the remarkable history behind it. Beyond food, Bose's influence also shaped Japanese perceptions of Asian solidarity. Through his connections with thinkers like Kawa Shumei, Sun Yat-sen, and Inukai Tsuyoshi, he advocated for a version of Pan-Asianism that was based not on conquest but on mutual respect and liberation. He believed that the struggles of India, China, Korea, and other colonized nations were intertwined, and that Asia could only rise if its people supported each other across national and linguistic divides. It is no surprise that even decades after his death, Bose is remembered in Japan with reverence. Public exhibitions, academic papers, and documentaries have examined his life and contributions. In Indian diplomatic circles in Japan, he is honored not only as a revolutionary but also as a cultural icon. Events held at Nakamaraya occasionally commemorate his role in shaping Indo-Japanese relations. His tomb at Thomas Cemetery remains a site of quiet pilgrimage for those who study India's global independence movement. Back in India, however, Bose's story is less widely known than it deserves to be. Often overshadowed by Subhas Chandra Bose, another heroic figure in the freedom movement, Rash Behari's name appears less frequently in textbooks or political discourse. Yet, without his groundwork in Japan, it is doubtful whether the Indian National Army or the Free India Provisional Government would have come into existence in the form they did. His legacy, thus, is multidimensional. A revolutionary who organized armed resistance from abroad, a diplomat who bridged cultural worlds, a mentor who nurtured future leaders, a husband and father who embraced life in exile with honor, and a chef, perhaps the most surprising of all, who rewrote the culinary history of Japan with a dish that still carries his imprint nearly a century later. In his quiet, unassuming way, Rash Behari Bose redefined what it meant to be a revolutionary. For him, resistance was not only on the battlefield or in the corridors of power, it was also in the kitchen, in cultural exchange, and in the hearts and minds of people who dared to imagine a world free of imperialism and full of shared dignity. Part 8. Legacy in Two Nations: Memory, Misunderstanding, and Rediscovery. As the world transitioned into the post-war period, the memory of Rash Behari Bose began to take on a dual identity deeply rooted and honored in Japan, but increasingly obscure in his native India. It is a paradox that defines much of his legacy, a man who fought for India's independence for over 3 decades, yet one who is often remembered more vividly abroad than in the country of his birth. In Japan, Bose's legacy remained vibrant. His contributions were celebrated not only by those directly involved in the independence movement, but also by the public, who had come to regard him as a symbol of Indo-Japanese friendship. His adopted homeland had embraced him in life, and it continued to do so after his death. His grave in Tokyo's Tama Cemetery is carefully maintained. Occasional visits from Indian diplomats, cultural envoys, and historians continue to this day, often accompanied by ceremonies honoring his role in the independence struggle. Academic institutions in Japan have included him in curricula related to Pan-Asianism, modern history, and cross-cultural diplomacy. In public consciousness, he is recognized as a pioneering figure in shaping early 20th century Indo-Japanese relations. One of the enduring markers of his cultural influence is, surprisingly, a dish: the Nakamaraya curry. Still served at the historic cafe in Shinjuku, it stands as a quiet monument to a man who introduced not only the taste of India to Japan, but also its ideals and spirit. Diners are often surprised to learn that the savory plate before them is more than a meal. It's the culinary legacy of a revolutionary in exile. His legacy was also kept alive by those he mentored. A.M. Nair, Bose's protege and confidant, became an influential figure in post-war Japanese-Indian relations. He chronicled Bose's life and work, preserving his memory through essays, public talks, and eventually through the founding of Tokyo's famous Nair restaurant in 1949. This restaurant became a hub for cultural diplomacy, frequented by politicians, scholars, and artists who saw in Nair's food and hospitality a continuation of Bose's mission to build bridges. However, in India, Bose's contributions became less visible with time, overshadowed by Subhas Chandra Bose, often mistakenly thought to be his relative, and eclipsed by larger political movements like the Indian National Congress's campaigns led by Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. Rash Behari Bose's name faded from popular discourse. Part of this obscurity was due to the geopolitical context. Rash Behari had spent most of his life in exile. His affiliations with Japan, particularly during its alliance with the Axis powers in World War II, complicated his legacy in the eyes of the Indian political establishment after independence. Though the INA's efforts were acknowledged, the alignment with Imperial Japan created discomfort in a newly independent India that sought to project a non-aligned democratic image. Yet the narrative began to change slowly in the later 20th century, as scholars, journalists, and filmmakers began to reassess overlooked figures in India's freedom struggle. Rash Behari Bose's name re-emerged. Historians started to delve into the archives, both Indian and Japanese, unearthing correspondences, speeches, and personal accounts that revealed the depth of his commitment and the sophistication of his strategies. In Bengal, his native region, interest in his life began to grow. Local historians and educators started advocating for his inclusion in school textbooks and commemorative events. Documentaries were produced, exhibitions held, and research papers presented at conferences, bringing overdue attention to his contributions. One of the key challenges in understanding Rash Behari's legacy has been the fragmentation of his story across borders. While Indian historians had access to only part of the picture, Japanese sources held extensive records of his activities, personal life, and interactions with influential figures in Asia. Only through cross-national research efforts could a full and nuanced portrait of his life be reconstructed. His work also resonates strongly with the evolving identity of global Indian communities. As India has become increasingly connected with its diaspora, Bose's story offers a powerful narrative of identity, belonging, and the role of overseas Indians in shaping the subcontinent's destiny. He was, in many ways, the prototype of the Indian expatriate revolutionary, leveraging global alliances, building local trust, and merging international perspectives with national ideals. In modern diplomatic circles, Rash Behari Bose is increasingly acknowledged as a foundational figure in Indo-Japanese relations. Both governments have highlighted his contributions during bilateral meetings, cultural exchanges, and anniversaries of independence. His life now forms part of the shared historical narrative that binds India and Japan, two ancient civilizations that found common ground through one man's extraordinary journey. In 1997, during the 50th anniversary of Indian independence, new efforts were made to honor Bose's role. The Indian government sent official representatives to pay homage at his grave in Tokyo. Japanese officials joined in the ceremonies, reflecting the enduring respect he commanded. A bronze plaque was installed at the Nakamuraya Cafe, commemorating his life and legacy. Yet, for all the progress, there remains more to be done. Rash Behari Bose's story is still absent from many mainstream accounts of India's struggle for independence. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he did not seek public acclaim or political office. He was not a man of slogans, but of strategy, working quietly and consistently behind the scenes to bring about change. His story is a reminder that revolutions are not made by noise alone. They are also made in the quiet corners of tea houses, in whispered conversations with students, in smuggled letters, and in the courage to keep moving forward, even when the world forgets your name. In both India and Japan, his memory now lives on, not just in monuments or memorials, but in the values he embodied: perseverance, unity, and a belief in the power of cultural diplomacy as a force for liberation. Rash Behari Bose was not simply a man between two nations, he was a bridge between two civilizations. And through that bridge passed not only the flames of revolution, but the light of shared humanity. Part 9. A Life Remembered, the Quiet Hero of Two Worlds. As the curtain falls on the life of Rash Behari Bose, what remains is a legacy far more profound than the sum of his actions alone. His journey from the dusty lanes of Bengal to the tea rooms of Tokyo, from bomb plots in colonial India to drafting governments in exile in Southeast Asia, is not just the biography of a revolutionary, but the chronicle of an idealist who redefined the meaning of patriotism, exile, and cultural identity. Bose never returned to the land of his birth. Yet, in his heart, India never left him. It lived in his writings, in the dreams he shared with fellow exiles, in every shipment of weapons and letters smuggled home, and in every young Indian soldier he helped inspire across foreign soil. Unlike many leaders who lived to see independence dawn, Bose's life ended in January 1945. 2 years before India gained her freedom, but his death did not mark an end. It was a baton passed to the next generation. His influence on Subhas Chandra Bose was instrumental. Without Rash Behari's networks, cultural fluency, and political alliances, Subhas's leadership of the Indian National Army and the Azad Hind government would have lacked the foundation needed for legitimacy and mobilization. Rash Behari Bose may not have led soldiers on the battlefield, but he built the platform from which they marched. His methods were, in many ways, a masterclass in long-term strategy. He understood that fighting colonialism required more than just arms. It required cultural reclamation, political alliances, and public perception. He never abandoned diplomacy, even when faced with betrayal or geopolitical compromises. For Bose, revolution was not simply a matter of rebellion, it was the careful, often painful work of transforming the mindset of an enslaved people and educating others about that struggle. The contrast between Rash Behari Bose and many of his contemporaries also highlights a unique strength: his ability to navigate foreign societies without losing his core identity. In Japan, he was not merely tolerated, he was trusted. He learned the language, respected local customs, and offered more than demands, he offered kinship. This cultural humility earned him the respect of men like Toyama Mitsuru, Inukai Tsuyoshi, and even everyday Japanese citizens who had no personal stake in India's independence. It was this respect that shielded him from extradition, sheltered him during his most vulnerable years, and allowed him to foster a political base in a foreign land. Even his culinary legacy reflects this fusion. Through a simple but significant act introducing authentic Indian curry to Japan, he broke barriers that no pamphlet or political rally could. He showed that food, like ideas, could cross borders, dismantle prejudice, and bring people together. That a revolutionary could use a kitchen as deftly as a committee room speaks to the multifaceted genius of the man. But perhaps the most defining quality of Rash Behari Bose was his quietness. Unlike other revolutionary figures, he rarely courted attention or dramatized his role. There are no grand speeches preserved on film, no fiery recordings played in parades. Instead, we have letters, witness accounts, newspaper clippings, and the words of those he mentored, people who, even decades later, spoke of him with reverence. And it is this quiet strength that gives his legacy its unusual endurance. In Tokyo, his grave remains a place of calm reflection. In Shinjuku, diners unknowingly consume a piece of history. In Delhi and Kolkata, scholars dig through archives, slowly reconstructing the arc of a life too often overlooked. His story is being reassembled, not with loud tributes, but with thoughtful rediscovery. In India's current narrative, where the diaspora is increasingly seen as a vital part of the nation's story, Rash Behari Bose serves as a historical anchor. He reminds us that exile does not mean disconnection, and that loyalty to a homeland is not measured by proximity but by purpose. His story predates the modern global Indian identity, and yet it perfectly anticipates it. For modern India and Japan, Rash Behari Bose represents a rare bridge, not one built of convenience, but of shared ideals and mutual respect. He was among the first to envision an Asia free from Western domination, interconnected not by conquest, but by culture and cause. In this, he was a visionary far ahead of his time. As India navigates its role in the global arena and Japan reflects on its past alliances and modern diplomatic standing, the memory of Rash Behari Bose offers lessons about collaboration, cultural diplomacy, and principled struggle. In remembering him, we do not merely honor a man, we honor an idea. That the fight for freedom need not always wear a uniform. That real revolutions often happen in quiet rooms, over shared meals, between unlikely allies. And that the deepest patriotism may be expressed not through slogans, but through sacrifice. Rash Behari Bose was not just a revolutionary. He was a dreamer, a strategist, a cultural ambassador, a teacher, a husband, a father, and above all, a believer in freedom, in dignity, in the enduring power of ideals. His life invites us not only to remember but to imagine a world where bridges matter more than borders, and where the struggle for justice is waged not just in war zones, but in every corner of the human spirit.